First thing up is Senate Bill 126. Chuck, you want to give us an overview? And I know we had 126 last year in Fed and State. It passed out. I know it went across the Senate floor. Senator Lynn introduced it, and it was a piece of her legislation. So it's part of the American Legion in Olathe, but this will affect them all across the state. Go ahead, Chuck, and give us an overview on 126, and then we'll open the hearing up.
All right, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My video does not appear to be working, so I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, Chuck. Go ahead.
Okay. Senate Bill 126 provides an opportunity for Class A clubs under our alcohol beverage laws to host functions and to serve alcoholic beverages at those functions. So, and as you indicated, Chairman, this is a bill that was around last year. The history of this bill is it was heard in the Senate, passed out of the Senate as amended. It passed the Senate by a vote of 38-0, and then was referred to in the House side, was referred to the Committee on Federal and State Affairs, and in May of 21 died in that committee. The definition of Class A club is found on the first page of the bill. That's a premise that is owned or leased by a business, operated as a bona fide nonprofit social, fraternal, or war veterans club, as determined by the director, for the exclusive use of the corporate stockholders, partners, trust beneficiaries, or associates, and their families and guests accompanying them. So under current law, a Class A club is restricted. This bill expands that. It adds a line there referencing the statute that is amended in the bill. And then if you turn to page 2, or actually page 3 of the bill at the bottom of the page there, we have a provision that Class A clubs are going to be allowed to offer for sale, sell, and serve alcoholic liquor for consumption on the licensed premises by individuals other than those individuals specified in the definition as indicated, the restricted current law, during an event held in accordance with Subsection D. And Subsection D describes what needs to occur for a Class A club to be able to hold a function. Initially, it again provides that a Class A club may do so, may offer for sale, sell, and serve alcoholic liquor for consumption on the premises. And again, by individuals other than members of the licensee, their families, or guests during an event. There's some requirements that the club has to provide electronic notification to the director at least 48 hours prior to the event. The director then makes that electronic notification available to local law enforcement. The club also has to retain agreements, receipts, and records of alcohol purchase for a period of 3 years for inspection by the director. And there's also a definition of event. It means any function, occasion, celebration, or other event held on the premises, licensed premises, for a specified duration of time, and during which individuals who are not members of the licensee, their families, or guests are permitted to enter and use the licensed premises. And this is important, pursuant to an agreement between the licensee and the contracting party. So there's a requirement for an agreement for this function. There's a requirement of electronic notification to the director. And there's a requirement that certain documents, agreements, receipts, records of alcohol purchase be maintained by the Class A club. And that is what the bill does.
Okay. We'll go ahead, and do we have any questions? Check. Senator Holland.
Charles, hey, good morning. So just so I'm understanding this, right now, Class A clubs, they have a membership, correct, of where basically those members can only drink on the premises of their establishment, correct?
Chuck.
Yes,
Oh, wait.
Senator.
Go ahead. He's asking our revisor. Sorry.
Yes, Senator, that is correct. The current restrictions, you can see that on page 1 of the bill, lines 28 through 34, which defines what a Class A club is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so for the committees, and I'm not conflicted here because I'm not a Class A liquor club. I actually have a Kansas Farm Winery. But we have a very similar situation with SEP a number of years ago for Kansas Farm Wineries from the perspective of there was a special event structure set up where you, in fact, could basically serve samples of your wine off of your premises. Of course, this was an event that had to be registered with ABC. But to me, this is consistent with basically expanding opportunities for the American Legions basically to have these special events where they can bring in new people versus, beyond their current drinking clientele. And this to me is consistent with other things going on in the industry in Kansas. So I think I'd like to support it unless somebody has a problem with it, but I think it's pretty good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and have our first proponent, Walter Geis. I think you'll elaborate on why.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you guys today, or you senators, I'm sorry. I'd like to, I'm represented by post number 153 in Olathe. I brought Robert Hall and Mike Harrington with me, all members and veterans of the military services. As was previously brought up, is that this did come through and pass the Senate last year. It did not get an opportunity due to COVID to get through the House. We hope we can get a better result this year. As some of you may know, the American Legion was chartered in 1919, basically a patriotic organization. We represent the military. And at that time, there were more than 2 million members as members of the American Legion. Today, we have fewer than 21,000 with 276 posts here in the state of Kansas. And of course, many communities rely primarily on the Legion for much of, if not all, their certain nonprofit support. These facilities are aging and becoming more costly. As members dwindle and posts are closing across the state, if not all certain nonprofit support, they are hard to maintain and particularly very costly. The state infrastructure that supports continued operational success of the business standpoint, the Kansas Legions are a major disadvantage to most states in that it has archaic laws limiting access to non-members for many of its social and commemorative activities. To wit, only members and their guests may partake of alcoholic beverages in the club room of Legion Post. The club room is usually a restaurant lounge setting where small social events are typically held. Most posts have much larger halls and outdoor facilities that are not legally able to serve alcoholic beverage to the non-members, as you were pointing out, Senator. Even nonprofits go elsewhere to hold major events because of this prohibition. The loss of revenue is truly devastating to our ability to meet our aging posts' ever-increasing operating cost and also being able to attract new members. Typically, our post on 153 for the past 2 years have had to support not only building repairs and parking lots and all of that. We are at a real disadvantage, and as it stands right now, we would only be able to maintain our facility not more than about 2 more years. So this bill, as intended, would help us to not only provide for our members, but non-members would help us sustain as a organization. I would like to know, I have a list of other things that we do support at 153. Would you like to know those organizations that we support?
Feel free.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Well, of course, Boys State, many of you may be familiar with that. We average about 25 young men each year at a cost of about $275. Catholic Charities Food Pantry, Chamber of Commerce, Kids Fishing Derby, Easter egg hunts, kids Christmas parties, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, Olathe Baseball, Salvation Army, VA Canteen, VA Fish Fry, Mayor's Christmas Tree Fund, Special Olympics, and Veterans Needs. And today, in our main hall, the VA came out and are giving 600 COVID shots to members that are supporting us. So we try to do the best we can for our community, and certainly are not just primarily interested in how we can serve beer better. So if you have any questions, I'd be glad to help you.
Let me make sure I understand, Walter. If I recall from last year, you have the big banquet hall there, but you're unable to sell liquor in the big banquet hall, only in the regular area where veterans can go is the only place you can sell liquor. This would allow you guys to, if there's a wedding or if there's a special event that wants to host, be able to sell the liquor in the banquet hall. And you have to give, what was it, 48 hours notice to the ABC and et cetera? Okay.
Yes, by law. We also have car shows outside. We would be able to take non-members to come into our club facility if they wanted to order a beer or something of that nature.
And it's probably going to get you more frequent use of the banquet hall too, which helps keep your revenue up, pay your taxes, and keep the facilities up. Okay, questions by the committee. Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if this is necessarily a question for this conferee or staff, but as far as the liability for someone who overconsumes and then goes out and causes an auto accident, someone loses their life and so forth, is the liability the same? Would it be the same for a club such as this as it would be for any other alcohol establishment that serves or sells alcohol?
I would be guessing, but I would say it would be true of any other facility that serves alcohol.
I didn't mean to be disrespectful, because I didn't figure you would know, because it's a pretty involved thing, and I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if the organization has really looked at that, but that would be a concern of mine for anyone who serves alcohol, is the liability, because you can't always control who consumes how much and then what they do after they leave. So I just thought that I would throw that out. Thank you.
Sure. Whether Senator Holland? Oh, Senator Stephan?
Thank you, Chairman. We mentioned that this bill passed the Senate last year 38-0 amended. Is this the amended version?
I think the bill's identical to as it passed last year. Might have been amended in committee, I don't remember. But it's the identical bill. Yeah, that passed. Senator Holland.
I just had a request. We might hear from the ABC or alcohol industry. So my question is, I wonder if Senator Peck, and I want to put words in a good senator's mouth, but he may be talking about possibly dram laws, dram shop laws at all. I know we've had that debate here many years ago. You know, just I can tell you as a farm winery, if somebody comes in my tasting room, if they appear inebriated or I have any sense they are inebriated, I will obviously not serve them. But as far as liability beyond that, I don't think there really is any to the American Legion, and somebody can correct me. I'm sure I'm grossly wrong on that. But I mean, I think as long as you're making a good faith effort to be sure that whoever is getting served, you're not serving an inebriated person, I think as long as you make that good faith effort, I think you're pretty much okay.
My guess is too, you're going to have experienced bartenders from the American Legion out there serving. It's basically right across the hall at this one, but this will impact all of them across the state. It'll allow them to probably being able to open up to some wedding opportunities and different opportunities. I mean, to me, it's they got a big facility, the one in Olathe. It's not in my district. It's in Gossage's district. It would have been Senator Lynn's district before, but I can see it from my district. Senator Holland.
Just real quick, one thing you are going to be very vigilant on is being sure you're carding and not serving underage.
Exactly.
I mean, that's,
Exactly. We had, like you say, we do have very experienced bartenders, and they been advised and trained not to allow somebody over drink like you're talking about, or any underage.
Further questions or comments? Okay. Do we have any other proponents on 126 that want to speak? Not seeing any. Do we have any opponents? Neutrals? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and close the hearing. Thanks, guys, for coming up. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll move on to the hearing on Senate Bill 137. Chuck, you want to give us an overview? We'll probably work this bill here, 126, in the next couple of days. Chuck, go ahead and give us an overview on 137.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Senate Bill 137 is also a bill that was around last year. This is a bill that expands a current statute that applies only to military service members or their spouses, and attempts to offer those military service members and their spouses a better opportunity to obtain work here in Kansas, based on their credentials from another state. And this bill expands that idea, providing an easier access to work in this state for individuals who hold credentials from another jurisdiction, or also who hold work experience or a private certification, and facilitate their ability to work in Kansas. The first part of the bill involves a number of definitions. The first definition of importance is right there on page 1, applicant. So in addition to a military spouse, military service member, we're also including any individual who has established or intends to establish residency in the state. There is an exception there with respect to the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. An applicant has to have met the employment requirements pursuant to current law. There's a definition of complete application, basically that the licensing body has received all the forms, fees, documentation, any other information required. That complete application does not include a criminal background report from the KBI if the licensing body has received the other information. So the KBI need not be included, need not be back yet, that criminal background report for the application to be considered complete. Private certification is defined as a voluntary program in which a private organization grants recognition to an individual who meets certain qualifications and standards. And then we get into the heart of the bill. So in the middle of page 2, we have the sort of the beginning premise of this bill is that if you could submit a complete application, you can lawfully practice your occupation, based on the rest of the bill. And the first part is an applicant who holds a valid current license, registration, or certification in another jurisdiction of the United States. For those applicants, if they qualify under the applicable Kansas laws, either licensure, registration, or certification by endorsement, reinstatement, or reciprocity statutes, then we just have a provision that speeds up the time that they are to receive their credentials to engage in their occupation in Kansas. So you'll see there in lines 25 and 28 of the middle of page 2, it goes from 60 days to 15 days if you are a military service member, or military spouse, or within 45 days for other individuals. If the applicant does not qualify under current Kansas applicable licensure, registration, or certification by endorsement, or reinstatement, reciprocity statutes of the applicable licensing body of the state, or if there aren't any applicable statutes, then the applicant shall receive a license, registration, or certification if the applicant fulfills a number of requirements. And again, these are for applicants who hold credentials from another jurisdiction, from another United States jurisdiction. So the first requirement at the bottom of page 2 is that they hold a valid current license in the other jurisdiction that authorizes a similar scope of practice as those established by the licensing body of the state. So that applies to their current credentials. Or they hold a certification issued by another state for practicing the occupation, but this state requires an occupational license. So they have a certification in another state. Kansas requires a license, but the licensing body determines that the certification requirements certify a similar scope of practice as the licensing requirements in Kansas. So that's the first requirement. Second requirement is that they can't have committed a bad act in any jurisdiction that would have constituted grounds for limitation, suspension, or revocation of their credentials. Or they can't have been censured or had any other disciplinary action taken. The next requirement is they cannot have been disciplined by licensing, registering, certifying, or other credentialing entity in another jurisdiction, and they can't be the subject of an unresolved complaint or a disciplinary proceeding. The third requirement there, or capital D, they cannot have a disqualifying criminal record. They have to provide proof of solvency, financial standing, bonding, or insurance if required by the licensing body of the state, to the same extent as required of any other applicant. And they have to pay any fees required by the licensing body of the state. So then, upon receiving this complete application, the licensing body is to issue the license, registration, or certification within, again, 15 days if you're a military service member or military spouse, or within 45 days for other individuals. Now that license, registration, or certification is issued on a probationary basis, and the licensing body may revoke it if any information provided in the application is found to be false. Upon completion of that probationary period, the license, the credential becomes non-probationary. Now, there is a provision with respect to applicants who have not been in the active practice of their occupation during the 2 years preceding the application. So if you haven't been in the active practice of your occupation, you may be required to complete additional testing, training, monitoring, or continuing education requirements as a Kansas licensing body may deem necessary, and in a manner that protects the health and safety of the public, as further provided in the bill. On page 4, subsection E refers to providing a work opportunity in Kansas for applicants who just have work experience in another state. So applicants who apply on the basis of their work experience shall receive an occupational license registration or certification for Kansas if they have worked in a state that does not use credentials to regulate the occupation, but Kansas does, and they have worked for at least 3 years in that occupation during the 4 years immediately preceding the application, and they satisfy the requirements that we just went through. So in that circumstance, then they get their credentials based on prior work experience. And again, if they satisfy those requirements that we just went through. Subsection F in the middle of page 4 pertains to applicants who want to receive a Kansas credential based on their holding of a private certification and work experience in another state. So again, if the applicant holds a private certification and worked in a state that does not use a credential to regulate the occupation, but again, Kansas does use a credential, they have to have worked for at least 2 years in that occupation. They have to hold a current and valid private certification, and they have to be in good standing by the organization that issued the private certification. And again, they have to satisfy the requirements that we went through earlier. Subsection G provides that an applicant that receives credentials is entitled to the same rights and subject to the same obligations as are provided by the licensing body for Kansas residents, except that their credential can be revoked if an applicant's credentials in the other state are revoked or suspended. On page 5, subsection H, pertains to a situation where we have an applicant that the licensing body decides that their credential does not authorize a similar scope of practice as that issued by the licensing body of the state. In that case, the Kansas licensing body shall issue a temporary permit for a limited period of time to allow the applicant to lawfully practice their occupation while completing any specific Kansas requirements. Subsection I, again, is a similar provision in the event that the licensing body determines that an applicant the subsection H I just referenced applies to non-resident military spouses or non-resident military service members. Subsection I is similar. It applies to other individuals. Again, if the licensing body determines that the credential does not authorize a similar scope of practice as that issued as a Kansas credential, the licensing body may issue a temporary permit to allow the applicant to work in Kansas while completing any specific Kansas requirements. And one significant difference here in the bill currently is that if you look at line 24, in the case of individuals who are not military spouses or service members, the language is may, so the licensing body has discretion. In the case of military spouses and military service members, if you look at line 10 of page 5 of the bill, the word is shall, and so the licensing body does not have discretion. It is to issue a temporary permit. Moving down on page 5, if again, a similar provision that with reference to individuals who are applying on the basis of a private certification or work experience, and again, there to be shall be issued a temporary permit for a limited period of time to allow the applicant to practice their occupation while completing specific Kansas requirements. There's a language at the bottom of page 5 that limits these continuing education or testing or training requirements to those that would be materially different or additional to the law of another state. So there's not a broad requirement there for training. It's limited. Subsection M is kind of a different issue within the bill. It pertains to a physician. This particular section pertains to treating patients by remote means by an out-of-state physician. So this subsection provides that a physician holding a license issued by another state may practice telemedicine to treat patients located in Kansas if they receive a telemedicine waiver issued by the State Board of Healing Arts. And there's a requirement that the State Board of Healing Arts issue that waiver within 15 days from receipt of a complete application if the physician, one, submits a complete application in a manner determined by the State Board of Healing Arts and pays the fee. Two, holds an unrestricted license to practice medicine and surgery in the other state and is not subject to any investigation or disciplinary action. And in
Chuck,
that situation,
can you kind of just gloss over the last
okay, I'll try and speed it
portion
up. I
of it?
apologize. Yeah, I apologize, Chairman. This is a complex bill.
I know.
So that section deals with telemedicine. Basically, it provides an opportunity for out-of-state physicians to treat or assist, rather, patients in Kansas. Moving on, there's a provision about electronic credentials on page 7. Basically, it allows licensing bodies to issue electronic credentials and develop a system to do that. There's a provision on the bottom of page 7 that is important, that applies specifically to the State Board of Healing Arts. The State Board of Healing Arts can use a standard of substantially equivalent when it looks at credentials from other states. As you recall, the rest of the standard is substantially similar, I believe, or a language to that effect, but it's a different standard that is granted to the State Board of Healing Arts. The rest of the bill just lists the bodies that have to follow this provision. There's a provision for reports to the legislature at the bottom of page 8. There's an exemption for attorneys because attorneys are regulated by the Supreme Court of Kansas. So I apologize for the length of the review, and that is what the bill does.
Questions for Chuck? Questions? Senator Holland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, Charles, I have a question for you. And this is not my original idea because I know other committee members probably have the same question as well, too. This isn't exactly new material, right? I mean, first of all, we had a bill similar to this that came through Senate and the House last year, didn't we? And we just, I don't know if it's because of COVID or whatever, that it was not acted upon, correct?
That is correct, Senator. This bill was heard in Senate committee last year. And in fact, it was amended specifically with respect to some of those reporting requirements. So yes, you are correct, sir. This is not exactly new material.
But that never made it, did that ever make it to the floor in the House or the Senate, or did it just, I'm trying to figure out, was it because of COVID or why we didn't complete that work last year?
If you give me a moment, I'll try and look up the history of that. I don't recall exactly what happened.
Okay.
Imagine some of the proponents probably have a little bit of that.
Okay. And then, Charles, an additional follow-up question. This is back to the military portion of this. we passed, obviously, this goes back to what, 2013, 2014, what the original military spouse preference that we enacted. What's the history on that?
Senator, I can look up that statute and see when it was first enacted, but yes, you're correct. That statute has been around for at least some time, and this bill basically really expands that current law, which only applies to military service members and spouses.
Okay, and we don't, Mr. Chairman, we don't have any people from the, we have anybody from the military today proponents on this bill, or? I guess, Charles, what I'm trying to figure out, maybe if anybody research or anybody in the committee would know, what has been the federal government's reaction to the military-related piece of this legislation that was passed however many years ago? I mean, are they happy with our progress with that? Are they putting the stick to us to get more, be more responsive to military spouse needs? Do we have any federal feedback, or are there any federal implications as far as that we need to do something or we'll fall out of favor? Do you have any thoughts on, maybe the conferees could speak to that, I don't know, but that's something I'm interested in. Charles, do you have any thoughts on that?
Senator, no, I don't have any information about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Huh? Senator Dodge, yeah, I think Representative, are you going to testify today? Okay. Do you want to add something to that, or up to you? You can go ahead and start. Oh, you made the test. Did you get your testimony in already?
It was a little late last night. My apologies.
Go ahead. We'll let you start off since you probably, huh? Okay. We're going to go ahead and let him know because he's repping.
Will he take questions in afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay, super.
I was going to ask you, thank you, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to go ahead and answer the questions now, or just go ahead and go through my
Why don't
comments?
you go through your comments
Wait.
and then
All
you can answer questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Sure,
Chair.
Mark will appreciate it, right?
All these guys will do cleanup, I'm sure. Thank you, committee, for the opportunity. This bill, as it was designed throughout this whole process, is about growing workforce. That's the bottom line here. We recognize that we have a talent problem, that we have an outbound migration of talent, and this is a process, or one of the many steps that we're trying to do to grow the talent in this state. And it's taken, the core of this thing is, it's working professionals in another state that want to move to this state, and we want to recognize the fact that as they move across our state lines, that all their knowledge, skills, and experience from their many years of working are not invalidated, that we actually take those into consideration as we're moving. So that's the kind of process. And for me, this has been a long process. I experienced this with my wife, as I talked to many of the committee members last time. My daughter then experienced it 20 years later. I've commanded soldiers for 30 years, or led soldiers for 30 years, and many times we're going through the same thing. And if you think it's solved now, there was a bill that was done in 2015. It's still a problem. It was a problem last summer. This summer, I worked with a veteran and a non-veteran trying to get their spouses to work here, and they've been waiting for over 1.5 years now to try to get through the process of getting their license. So this is definitely a problem we have in our state. There are things we have to do, and there's many things that we've put into this bill that will help solve that problem, or at least get us moving in that direction. So as was mentioned, or and the third thing is this is a negotiated bill. We've negotiated over 100 hours of things, and I can promise you that I don't think there's anybody that's perfectly happy with the way it is. It's negotiated.
Sounds perfect.
Right? So I'm one of them that's not very happy with some of the things that are in here. So it is what it is, and we're willing to move forward that way. First off, there was an Arizona bill that was done as an expansion of going through this process. The Arizona bill was passed, I think it was 2019, and it talked about scope of practice. When I started doing the bill last year, I didn't quite feel comfortable going that far at the time just because of my own ability to articulate. There was a comment about a DOD and how do they feel about this. So there was a Department of Defense study that they were directed to do, and it was released while we were out for COVID. And part of what it said is that the original language and content of what people were doing, so our original bill in 2015 was resulting in about 9 months for people to get their license once they'd moved here. The Department of Defense felt that was a problem. The second part of it, they felt that using substantially equivalent language was too restrictive, which is what we used last year, and that something more universal would be something that we should consider. And looking back at the Arizona bill, which many supported, was about scope of practice. And so hence, that's why we went back with that concept, feeling more comfortable with the process now. And quite frankly, 14 states are in the process of approving this bill. If we'd have done it last year, we'd have been the number 2 state. Now we're number 14 or 15 as we get through it. But that's where, again, this is, like I mentioned, this is about working professionals. It's about getting them to come here and start working and growing our force and getting them to work faster. So in the bill, we originally went with 10 days, recognizing that that's a goal of the future. But we've established something in this thing, 15 days for military, 45 days for everybody else as we're growing into this with the intention of closing that gap in the future. Didn't want to do something that's unrealistic, wanted to do something that's realistic that can be accomplished with everyone. And we recognize that some of the things we did last time might have caused a large fiscal note, so we removed those things in an effort to keep this thing something that we can do. In this process, we also want to make sure that we understand that everybody's unique. Everybody comes to the table with unique skills and talents. And we need to understand those things and apply them then to our standards that we have and take into account all the pieces and parts. So what this also does, this bill takes into account the orders that were done under the emergency executive orders during the emergency, and kind of formalized many of those that we thought were important to do. The bill has a piece on telemed. In the House version of that, we have taken that out because it's been asked to be put in a telemedicine bill. So it's in the telemedicine bill and it's working its way through that process. And this bill does differ slightly from the version that we've had, and we have a second version that's going to be coming out within the whenever we start working the bill on the floor. So there will be a few things, and I'll be glad to share those independently with the committee if you'd like me to, Mr. Chairman, as we go along. Ultimately, in this process, the board still remain in control. So put it this way, you're a working professional in another state. You come to this state, you want to move here. You're not here yet, but you want to move here. That's the important part. You can apply. You come in, the first question is, did you complete the application? Yes, you've completed the application. That's when the time clock starts ticking. There's a lot of things to that, but that's what's defined in there. Then after that, you ask a question about are you military or not. That defines the number of days and a may versus shall. All right. Then after that, then what it does is says, okay, did your state have a license of this? The answer, if they have a state license in your state for that, are you licensed in that state? If the answer is no, then this bill doesn't apply to you. If the answer is yes, you have a license, do you have a year's job experience? If the answer is yes to that, which was a new ad we put on this year, then you go to the board, and the board views the scope of practice and what you've been doing versus what we do here and the expectations here, and makes a determination. Are you similar scope of practice? Do these things kind of equate to each other? If they do, then we give you a license. It's that process. If you're not, the next question is, if we limit you a little bit and give you time to do some things, but continue to work and provide for your family, are you safe? Do you jeopardize health and safety? If the answer is no to that, then we give you a temporary license. We then give you some things to do, and then you get a full license as you finish that work. If you are unsafe, and we heard examples of that last year, if there was some health and safety issues, then the board has the opportunity as a pressure relief valve to say no. And those are all the things we've built into this as a negotiating tool. Specifically about Department of Defense. So what's been announced with the Biden administration is that they're going to cut the Army by 50,000 soldiers. So just kind of put that in your mind. That's 2 divisions. A little plus 2 divisions. The number 9 and number 10 division listed based off training area right now is the one at Fort Riley. Okay? Several folks have already been contacted about the next round of BRAC that is possibly coming. The scorecard uses things like this bill to determine if they're going to implement BRAC into the area. I can't say that this is only the issue, but this is one of the issues that's there. This bill takes us from being red, which we are right now, because where it's 9 months, it takes a long time to get a license, to being amber/green, green only being if you are full reciprocal. You walk in, you have a license, you get to operate here without anything else. We're not there. I'm not trying to take us there. I'm trying to get us to amber so we get off that list and we get to where it's going to be protected. We've never been affected by BRAC. We've had 3 closings prior to BRAC, But since BRAC, we're one of very few states, I think 13 states have never had a closure, and I believe if I get the numbers right, we might have one of the highest populations of military of that group. So that means we might be in danger, but let's not take a risk. That is part of this thing. We definitely want to make sure that we are moving ourselves in the right direction. Mr. Chairman, I know you're very busy, and I'm probably just want to open it up for questions, but this is a serious problem that needs some solving. I feel like this is something we can do and should do. I've explained why I've changed and moved towards a certain direction. It was all based off of what the Department of Defense study said. We did want to expand it off of what's done. Typically in the military, we start doing a test bed with us and then it expands to other people. I think 6 years now is a good time to let's start expanding it to other people in Kansas, and let's hope it's less than 6 years when we start applying faster regulations for everybody. Again, thank you for your time, and I appreciate y'all's strong support of this bill. I stand for questions.
Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your testimony and obviously the time and effort and the thought processes that went into this. That's really impressive and cool. And I did not know that the House had taken out the telemedicine part, because as you read through this bill and you see all that thought process you put into it, when you hit the telemedicine, it goes off the rails. So I think that's very important that gets verbalized and we understand this, because it ends up being basically two separate bills in that respect. And ultimately, I will try to push it that direction as well. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Senator Holland.
Mr. Chairman, I have lots of questions about this bill. Representative, are you the lead conferee on this, or are there other folks back there that want to take questions? I'm just trying to figure out where to go to.
I'm sure there will be others that will take questions on both sides.
Are you the most knowledgeable about this?
Some days.
Okay, because I really got a lot of questions about this, and I was the ranking on the Senate Commerce Committee last year, and I was incredibly conflicted about this. So
Yes, sir.
can we dive into it?
Yes.
Okay, and people tell me to shut up, and I'll come back with more questions later. First of all, just a request, I would like to see the DOD report.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you something now. Just the way you're describing it, I think one of the assumptions is that our current licensure boards, certification processes, whatever, it sounds like from your perspective, proponents, they're not responsive enough. Would that be correct?
As far as what they're doing today?
Yes.
I think based off the study that we have and says it takes 9 months, I would argue that that's probably not very responsive.
No, but that was the study specifically for our military spouses, or was that for all people going through the?
For military spouses and
Okay.
veterans and military members.
Okay, so.
Because that's what I'm sorry, Mr.
Yeah, go
Senator.
ahead, you're fine.
That was what they were directed to do by Congress as part of the NDA language, I think, of 2018. They were
Okay.
directed to do that study.
Gotcha. And so this is one of my real concerns with this bill, Mr. Chairman, is that I think we're conflating the things we need to do with out-of-state civilians versus our military spouses who are already in state. And so I want to real path now. When you put your bill together and you reached out to the various licensing boards, credentialing groups, whatever, did you ever map specific job occupations or major classes to those boards? Can we put an occupational face on, like, how many chiropractics, how many barbers, how many hairstylists? I mean, I don't know. Do you guys have anywhere, the proponents, do you have a list of the actual job classifications and roughly how many Kansans are currently working in those capacities?
Because I personally did not, and I do not have that information. I'm sure somebody else might have that, but I do not.
Okay. To me, that's very critical to know in going forward on the civilian side of this bill. My second question would be do you have any performance metrics on the jobs that these licensure boards, as far as their ability to be responsive or non-responsive to the current civilian going through this, non-military, as far as getting whatever credentialing and things they need? Do you have any data on that by any of these groups?
I do not, but also in talking to this, that's why we put on, in per your direction and discussion last year, we put on the reporting requirements that are in the bill. So that way, as we move forward with this, we understand exactly what's going on, and then we can do a rudder shift as we're moving.
Let's, you can do one more question, but then I want to roll through the testimony and he can come back.
I really want you to come back because I think you're the guy. And as I said, I've got some major concerns given our current state of unemployment. So I will hold off now then, Mr. Chairman.
I want to get through the proponents. If,
Okay.
go ahead, you got one.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be glad to meet with any representative, any committee member independently if you'd like that as well, because that's what I've been doing. Okay? Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mark Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and appreciate you giving all the tough questions to Representative Croft, Senator. So, Mark Dugan here representing Opportunity Solutions Project. We're a national-based think tank that focuses on reducing barriers to the workforce and getting people have the opportunity to live the American dream. I think Senator Stephan, as you mentioned, this bill is long, it's well thought out. There's a lot of different sections that have a lot of moving parts. But really, what it's doing is pretty simple. It's doing two things. It is vastly improving the current military statute on the books for military families moving here. It increases their timelines, it changes the standard with which they're concerned, and it really will do a better job for military families moving to Kansas. Second, it applies those same standards more broadly, but at a, I would say, more back-of-the-line approach. So we're taking care of the military folks first with 15 days, moving other folks more to the back of the line, but still with a tighter timeline. And so those are the two things that this bill is doing, is creating the ability for folks to move here and provide for their families and earn a living. I do think, and I'll be brief because I know there's several folks coming behind me, I do think there is a, when you have bills like this with a lot of moving parts, Representative Croft has done a great job of having access and have conversations with all the conferees. We're unaware of somebody who's opposed or opposed/neutral, who has not had the opportunity to weigh in on this issue. Now, I think to his point, no one loves, there are concessions that have been made in the process by us, by other advocates for the bill that we don't love. But we do think the health and safety portions are an important pressure release valve to ensure the boards have those ability to reject applicants for health and safety reasons. But I also do think it's really important to, when you have bills like this, some of the testimonies, often it's complicated, it's hard. Folks like legislators can't understand the issues. I want to be very clear of the policy difference that is occurring here that you guys are going to have to make the decision on. And I'll just use the engineers as an example. The engineers are great people, do great work. The people who advocate for them are good folks. But at the end of the day, when you go to the substance of the issue, is the bill as it currently reads does this. If an engineer who has a PE license in another state has gone through the training that state requires, has passed that PE test, and then has been practicing for a period of time safely and with no issues, that person then can move to Kansas and receive a PE license. The engineer's position, or the board's position, would be that person, whether they've been practicing for 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, who has a PE license, who did the education training in Nebraska or North Dakota, that's different. That person moves to Kansas. If they didn't have the same education requirements, that person would be kicked down and say, you cannot practice your profession here. You cannot provide for your family in Kansas. You have to go back and do those education and other building block items. And at the end of the day, when folks say they want to move to a substantially equivalent standard, meaning you have to have the same standards there as you have here, that's what they're asking you to do. And that's just a disagreement that you guys, the senators here, get to make the policy decision on. Should we reject all should we reject all those licenses because they don't have the specific building blocks? Or should we consider their professional experience and qualifications and the passing of the national test that they've done? Senator Holland stepped out, but I did want to read from that military study. You're going to hear a lot of folks that are requesting a transition away from the scope of practice standard to the substantially equivalent standard. And the issue is, if you have a bill, if you guys pass a bill that says you have to have substantially equivalent standards in Kansas to practice here, why do you need a bill at all? Because you obviously already meet the standards to get a license. And so the issue there, and this is what the military said on page 11 of that report that we'll be happy to hand out, it says, half the states with laws impacting endorsements for military spouses include the terms, quote, substantially equivalent to describe a license that qualifies for endorsement. To effectively evaluate whether an applicant's license is, quote, substantially equivalent, a board generally evaluates the coursework, test scores, and applicable practicum hours of the applicant, along with previously held licenses and work experiments. Quote, this perpetuates the delays experienced by military spouses. Additionally, the review implication shows that state boards within an occupation continue to have varying evaluation processes and standards for awarding an endorsement, which further complicates the expected application process for military spouses. That happens to military spouses if you use substantially equivalent standards, and those exact same things will happen to anyone else who's trying to move to Kansas to provide for their families. So with that, we do believe this scope of practice standard is important. We think all the people who are opposed to the bill are good people, and we just disagree with some of their positions on this. And we hope this committee and the legislature focuses on the individuals who are trying to live, trying to provide for their families, and trying to make a living here in Kansas with the appropriate health and safety protections that this bill provides. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions or wait till the appropriate
All
time.
questions to the end. Eric Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm sorry, multitasking out in the hallway, hoping I wouldn't be going for a while. From what I heard, Mr. Dugan and Representative Croft did a good job summarizing the bill and the purpose of this bill. You'll see in our testimony in 2019 that Arizona became the first state in the nation to accept or pass legislation dealing with occupational licensure reciprocity. And the quote from the governor there said it best, is that you don't lose your skill sets just because you cross state lines. I think that's the goal here. I think the work that's been done over the last year and this year really took out a lot of the objections that the various boards and licensing bodies had. The goal here is to not just give a license to somebody who isn't qualifying, who might not have a license in another state, or who has a license in another state that's not to the same standards as what Kansas would have. And so I think the work that's been done on House Bill 2066 on the House side, language is varying a little bit compared to this, but still groups and organizations are having continued conversations and discussions on how to work through the perceived problems in the bill. Pretty confident that we'll get there with those parties. But ultimately, this is about getting individuals who are moving into the state, allowing them to enter the workforce quickly when they're qualified, and have the education and work experience to obtain that license quickly, while maintaining the board oversight and approval for those individuals. So keep it short. You guys have a lot of people left to speak. Happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, and would appreciate your support of Senate Bill 137. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Kevin Walker? We're going to hold questions. Kevin Walker?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kevin Walker, Overland Park Chamber. The previous conferees have done a great job of explaining the bill and certainly addressing from our standpoint the need to help reduce barriers to support our workforce. We all know that Kansas right now is a net out-migration state. That trend is expected to continue. And so we need to make sure that we can do whatever is possible to bring workforce back into this state. I'm not going to suggest that this bill by itself is a silver bullet and that's going to take care of everything, but I think it is a process for removing certain barriers that will encourage people to consider Kansas home. I think the bill also includes safeguards to make sure that the folks that are coming in here with their professional certifications and licensure from other states, that we know that they are meeting the standards that we want to have here in the state of Kansas. I think this is an important step to help us achieve the goal that we all want to achieve, and that's improving and enhancing our workforce. I understand there are a lot of folks from the professions that might have some specific concerns, and you're all going to have to wrestle with some of those challenges. And I won't address those challenges, but certainly just to encourage you to consider this in what it's trying to do, and that's improve our workforce.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Andrew Wings?
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for the time today. I'm proud to stand up on behalf of the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce and say that we support Senate Bill 137. We send out a legislative agenda survey every year, and this year was no different. Our members showed strong support for this type of legislation, which is why we're standing here today. You know what the bill does. I won't repeat that. I will add a couple comments to what Representative Croft said about the military side of this. I've been in past discussions at the Governor's Military Council, and it's apparent that improvements could be made to this existing statute on reciprocity as it relates to public awareness and enforcement. I think applying the policy more broadly should lead to better awareness of the policy's benefits to military spouses and service members. And another advantage would be more consistent application as more awareness and more license applications come through. So broadly speaking, I want to reiterate the point about BRAC, and that's a big deal for Kansas. And really every state should be looking at this policy to make sure that we don't get downgraded if future BRAC decisions are made that could impact our state. Another point I'd like to make, as you review this legislation, I would just encourage you to think of your own experience in traveling to other states back when we did that kind of thing. You may have received a manicure or a haircut from a cosmetologist, consulted with a pharmacist about filling a prescription, talked with a nurse about an ailment, maybe even purchased property with the help of a real estate agent in another state. I'd like to suggest to you that consumers already behave as if occupational licensing regulations are adequate in all states. Certainly they're different, but I think this bill has provisions that address that. In those situations when you were traveling to other states, you were probably not wondering if the licensing regime of that other state was different from Kansas regulations. You knew the professional was licensed or registered or certified. You received the benefits of their work and went on about your day. Another point that some other conferees have talked about is the workforce and talent attraction issue. Last year was a pretty rough year on Kansas workforce, starting off with the 737 MAX production suspension and then moving on to the far-reaching pandemic-induced recession. However, Kansas and other states are in recovery mode. As you all know, you hear from folks every day testifying on bills about that. If they aren't struggling already, many businesses will soon be hard-pressed to find the workforce they need to fill open jobs. They want to find qualified, trained, educated workers. We believe this bill is a tool to help us attract those kind of folks. It's also a growth issue. I think that's a bipartisan issue we can all agree on. Senate Bill 137 will help accomplish this. I'd like to read you a quote from the Kauffman Foundation in a report published a few years ago. They said, differences in state licensing requirements can make it difficult for entrepreneurs and workers to find opportunities and jobs, creating stale labor markets and underemployment. Mutual recognition of other state licenses would improve worker mobility and thereby boost economic dynamism. I think we'd all love to see Kansas be an economic dynamo. As Kevin mentioned, this bill by itself will not do that, but I do think it's a tool in the toolbox. If you choose not to pass this bill, that's certainly a policy decision you can make. I would just note that other states are passing similar legislation. Arizona was the first, and several others have followed. I don't have the exact number for you today, but it's growing every year. Additional states are not far behind, so our inaction, if we choose to table this bill this year, could lead to a situation where other states have this policy and they attract skilled Kansas workers to their state, and we don't have the capability to do the same thing. So instead of more brain drain, it's time to be the beneficiary of some brain gain. With this in mind, the Wichita Chamber asks you to report Senate Bill 137 favorably for passage, and I'm happy to stand for questions at the right time.
Thank you, Andrew. Old questions. Elizabeth Patton.
Thank you for allowing me to testify in front of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Patton. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas. I don't want to be redundant with previous testimony, but I do want to make some important points. As been said before, Kansans and all who wish to move to Kansas to contribute to our economy, including military families, but also including civilian families, deserve the dignity of personal choice as consumers and the ability to support their families without undue government burdens. So, as we continue to drive the internal occupational licensing reform conversation, we do urge you to support and pass out Senate Bill 137 from this committee. We believe this opens our doors to more jobs and more consumer choice in Kansas. So by approaching this issue correctly, Kansas has a great opportunity to drive reforms that will make the state a national leader and an attractive option for people to establish long-term careers. It's already been discussed, one of the main changes of this bill from last year. It did pass, this bill passed the Kansas House by 125 to 2, perhaps, or 223 to 2. Anyway, it was almost unanimous passage of this legislation last year in the House of Representatives. It did pass out of committee. On the Senate side, Representative Croft already discussed that, and I do also want to draw attention to the testimony by private citizen Courtney Eichhorn. In your written testimony, she is a military spouse who talked about why this bill is necessary and why the 2015 legislation that was passed needed to be revisited, and how we have worked to make this better. Going off of that and last year and how we continue to make this policy better by improving the language so that we are not back here in a few years, just like we are in 2015, so that we have an opportunity to finally pass some good, effective policy, much like other states have done, which has already been discussed, like Arizona, Utah, Iowa, Ohio, Idaho, many others, and is being considered in most of our surrounding states. While often well-intentioned today, many of the government occupational licensing requirements, we've had this conversation, that they often end up being anti-competitive, needlessly burdensome, often ineffective at addressing public health and safety concerns. I have referenced a study in my testimony from the University of Minnesota and the Brookings Institute that addresses some of that, but I did want to mention that nothing in this bill changes current statute or regulation related to the boards and agencies' body of regulation related to the scope of practice. So this bill gives the boards actually broader ability within their discretion to make those determinations, honestly, than we would have probably preferred in this legislation. But that's what makes this Kansas bill unique and different from those from the one that passed in Missouri and some others. The boards have incredibly broad discretion as they implement this bill. I do implore you at the end of this to not allow unelected regulators to water down this bill into something that is less effective and less meaningful, so that we're not back here in a few more years, once again, making changes. The last thing I want to say is, again, that this does have a telemedicine section in this version of the bill. That telemedicine section is based off of Governor Kelly's executive order. It's also the language that was in 2016 that passed during special session, and what was in SB 14. We have had conversations with the Board of Healing Arts and others in that field. We do believe that the part of telemedicine on here that makes those changes permanent that we already have in Kansas, addressing some of the concerns related to COVID. So the rest of what I have here is echoing much of what has already been said, so I'd be happy to pause and stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay. We have some written. Are there questions for the proponent? Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure which one would like to take these on. While I applaud the effort, on page 3 of the bill, it changes it from an affidavit to an application. Would anybody like to address that? I have concerns over that, because an affidavit, you can actually be criminally charged. A false application, it may not be the case.
Or Mark Dugan?
I don't have a great answer for the logic on that, but I do think we could go back and look at it and take a look at it.
That'd be great. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I do, I have
Yep.
another.
Go ahead.
It also changes the days from 15 to 45. If 15 if you're military, 45 non-military. I have some concern over whether the boards could be able to meet that time frame.
So those timeframes came as a product of negotiation with the boards last year. So originally, it was 10 days for everybody. We ended up agreeing, and that had some pretty significant fiscal impacts, as the boards felt they needed to staff up to address that. And they can speak for themselves after this, but I think that was intended to be a negotiated position that would lead to them not being able to accomplish what they're doing and not have a fiscal note. I will say, anyway, I think that was the answer.
If I may, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead.
Thank you. Page 4, it says that you've worked 2 years. Does that mean that you can work 1 day in 2018 and a year? A year is so vague. I know through rules and regs, we usually have number of hours per year or I think we need to drill down on that and make it more explicit.
So I do think we're open to that conversation. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what you've seen is we've had an awful lot of conversations about what-if scenarios by the length of the bill with different processes in place for each of them. I do think on that point, I think the intention is from date of issue of the license in another state and then practicing that profession for 2 years. So to your...
2 years? Is it 1 day, a year? I just think we need to work on the language. If I may, Mr. Chairman, then on page 5, line 32, it's a similar situation. Actually, I'll jump to page 5. There's a double negative in there. It's if you are not a non-resident. I just think the language needs some work. So thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Oh, go ahead, you got
I
it.
was going to say, there was a balloon amendment in the House with the substitute bill that I think addressed some of the inconsistencies, because I do think there's a lot of moving parts, as Senator Stephan said, and I think the substitute bill did solve a lot of those inconsistencies. I'm confident that there's some additional improvement, especially with the level of detail you're looking at, it could continue to happen.
Further questions? Okay. We're going to try to start with the opponents. Do we have anybody that's out of town or can't be here tomorrow on the opponents? Okay. We're going to stop right at noon. So Larry Carnes. We'll take this bill back up tomorrow with the opponents first thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Larry Carnes. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Board of Technical Professions. We license engineers, architects, geologists. These are highly trained, learned professions with advanced degrees required. And by Kansas statutes, the legislature has set the minimum qualifications to enter into those professions and practice those professions in Kansas. What concerns me about this bill, and I'm all in favor of expediting things for the military, and frankly, I think we do a good job. We turn licenses around for qualified applicants within a couple of weeks, but I say qualified applicants. We need to know that the applicant is qualified. This bill goes much further than that. It lowers the licensing qualifications for anybody coming to Kansas, and that's concerning. It's particularly concerning for people that I license, or my board licenses, I shouldn't say I, in these technical professions. We're not cosmetologists, no offense to cosmetologists. We want to make sure that Kansas structures and products are designed and built by people who are qualified and know what they're doing. You all maybe remember the Hyatt structure that collapsed. We had the Slitter bomb event just a year or two ago. Fortunately, those are far and few between. They're far and few between because we require qualified people to practice those technical professions in Kansas. I don't want them to reoccur any more often than that, and I'm sure you don't either. What's concerning about this is the lack of compliance with the minimum qualifications that are set in the Kansas statutes. This bill mandates licensing boards issue permits to fully practice to any licensed individual in another state, but whose license is found not to be of a similar scope of practice as a Kansas license. I want to direct your attention specifically to subsection H of the bill. It says, in the event the licensing body determines that the licensing registration or certificate held by an applicant does not authorize a similar scope of practice that is issued by the licensing body in this state, the licensing body shall issue a temporary permit to fully practice the profession. Then it says, while they go ahead and get any missing qualifications that they may need from the state that they were licensed in. We require in Kansas that you attend accredited universities, Kansas State, KU, that have accredited programs in these. Not every state requires an attendance of an accredited university in order to become licensed. My board licenses people from all over the world. Our board looks at transcripts from India, China, Africa, to see if those people qualify, to make sure that they have the basic education that they need to practice these technical professions. We need to be able to compare substantially equivalent qualifications in order to safely license people in the state of Kansas. Our licensing that we do now is, we have a robust reciprocal licensing process. We license about 30,000 professionals. Of those 30,000 we license, half of them are non-residents. You don't have to be a Kansas resident to get a professional license in Kansas. What you do need to do is to be qualified and to meet the Kansas minimum qualifications. Our licensees in Kansas are also licensed in other states, and to be licensed in those other states, they're required to meet those states' minimum qualifications, whether it be specific education, whether it be continuing education hours, whether it be experience. Those are requirements. This bill allows for the Board of Healing Arts an exception, to allow them to use the substantial equivalent standard. For the professions that they regulate, I think that's appropriate. I believe for the professions we regulate, that is an appropriate standard, and we're asking that the bill be amended so that we're included in Subsection S, along with the Board of Healing Arts, to be allowed to use a substantially equivalent standard when comparing someone's licensee's credentials. Now, I know there's a lot of other people here to testify. I've submitted written testimony. I hope that you'll take a look at that. But I want to mention something. People reference the Missouri bill or the Arizona bill. I looked at, and I'll finish up here in just a second. The Missouri bill uses substantially similar language. The Arizona bill, I'll read a section of it. This section does not prevent a regulating entity under this title from entering into a reciprocity agreement, except that the agreement may not allow out-of-state licensees to obtain a license in this state if the applicant has not met standards that are substantially equivalent to or greater than the standards required in this state. So what we're doing in this bill is we're going further than Arizona's gone. We're going further than other states have gone. We're eliminating the substantially equivalent standards. That may be fine for some occupations, but it's not good for technical professions that we regulate. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, I'm going to allow a question or two, and then we're going to suspend the hearing and pick it back up tomorrow. Senator Holland, you got a question?
So, yeah, thank you. I have a number of questions for Larry, Mr. Carnes. I want a couple, then I want to bring you back, okay, at the appropriate time. Everything you're saying is my just a lot of concerns I have with this bill. I want to be very clear to everybody. I support the military side of this. We need to be responsive to BRAC, the implications of that. But to me, the civilian thing is just totally, there's to me at least a disconnect here. I want to start on a couple things. Number one, tell me right now, how many unemployed or underemployed professionals under your scope do we have in Kansas currently? Any idea?
I don't have data on unemployment figures for engineers or architects or that sort of thing.
But you would guess you have a few unemployed folks out there and underemployed folks, correct?
We're in a pandemic, and I don't know. I assume so, yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about how, regardless of what profession you're in, how this bill on the civilian side is basically putting out-of-state workers, in essence, ahead of current unemployed Kansans? I mean, to me, this bill, the way it's set up, this would, if I were an employer and I really wanted to be cute, this to me creates a perverse incentive for me just to go out and recruit out of state.
Senator Hahn, you're absolutely correct. The bill establishes two levels of licensing, one for Kansans and one for people that are out of state. If you're a student going to KU or K-State and you're graduating and you want to get licensed for the first time in Kansas, you're held to the higher standard. You know, if you're coming in from another state, you're held to a lower standard. That's the essence of this bill.
Okay, and one more comment, then I do want to bring him back. But the second thing I really find frustrating with this bill is, and many of our legislators, both sides of the aisle, they really believe in technical training, workforce development, okay? To me, this bill over the long term, it trashes that. Once again, what is my incentive as an underemployed or unemployed Kansan to try to go to technical school and better my skills? Okay? And actually legislators invest in their people here to keep them here. Okay, versus, okay, let's just go drag in, lower cost labor across the state line. What does that say to our citizens?
You can make a 30-second comment, but, there's people needing this room, so we got to get out of here. Go ahead. You can come back tomorrow.
I prefer to do that.
And sorry it took so long. We'll pick back up with this bill tomorrow. We'll suspend the hearing, and we'll have opponents tomorrow. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you for your time.